morning. Can you hear me? Hear me good? Okay. All right. Hopefully you remember this movie. Does it ring a bell? Yeah. That's kind of my life. That's what my job does, sort of. So, a little bit about me. I have 7 kids, so I have a lot of kids. My wife and I have 7 kids. I built a pizza oven, and my wife did most of the work. And over the past 7 years, I've worked with a bunch of authors. So I haven't written any books. I don't have any qualifications. I just happen to be working alongside some brilliant people. And I've learned a lot, and I'm going to share with you today some of the things I've learned. So the best way I thought of describing what my job is, I don't know if you've ever, I'm sure you've seen this movie. You probably remember this. I'm what I think of as a flow plumber. So just like a plumber might come into your house and diagnose flow, I suppose, I come into large organizations and I look at how work is flowing, how value is flowing, and I make suggestions and I help them make things visible and I help them ultimately make things flow better. So I think everyone by this point has heard the word value stream. Maybe too much. Maybe we hear the word a little bit too much. It's a little bit of an abstract concept. The point of the slide is that just because you're not talking about it doesn't mean you don't have value streams. Everyone has value streams. Value streams are essentially how do we take valuable work to customers. So everyone does that, so therefore we all have value streams. Let's talk a little bit about a customer's point of view. So value streams and value stream thinking is aligned very closely to the way customers view value and software. So let's just walk through an example of how a customer might view software. So in this example, the customer asks for a new feature, a new functionality that would make their lives better. And it takes 46 weeks from the point they ask for it to the point at which they get it in their hands and they can use it. If you follow that work, like I said, I'm a flow plumber, I follow work, you'll see that most of the time in that 46 weeks is waiting. The red circles depict waiting in the slide. The green circles represent actual work, hands-on work, people doing work. Sometimes up front that work might be around gathering requirements or understanding the impact of those requirements. Eventually we get to the point where we're in the development mode and we're actually coding, and it's a very small amount of the overall time, you might notice here. And if you look at the way we think, a lot of times it's not aligned to the way our customers think. So as I said, the customer thinks it took 46 weeks. If you look at the way we measure, it's also not aligned to the way customers think. So if you look at that little circle, that's kind of the scope of where DORA metrics, a very popular measurement framework, might focus. The thing to notice here is that we're not actually measuring the customer's view, we're measuring our own view, in a sense, if you look at it. So if you were to ask a developer how long it took to develop this feature, a common response I might get is 5 days. That seems weird because the customer thought it took 46 weeks. So there's a big gap there between what we think and what our customers think. And if you were to ask a manager, quite frankly, often they don't have any idea. So there's even more of a gap there. But not here to slam on managers, I guess. Not today. So this is a view that I often see. We have a product, we use software to view flow. I'm a practitioner, I use software to help me understand where flow is moving and where it's not moving. The view you're looking at is something we call flow modeler. Basically what we see often is that companies are tracking work at 2 levels. So sometimes there's a higher level, usually it's an epic or a capability, which is pretty closely aligned to customer perspective. I talked about in the last slide where it's a longer time thing. It takes 46 weeks in the example. What we see there is if you watch the work and you watch how it flows, it stops in progress. So it appears as if everything's always in progress, and that's your bottleneck. If you dive down a little deeper and you start looking at the lower level tracking, in most companies I find that stories are the way they track most of the work, you get a totally different perspective. So there you find most of the work is not even started. That's where it waits. It waits unstarted. And it usually takes a very short amount of time, 10 days, 5 days, 7 days, really small time So if you think about DORA, and you think about the way we measure ourselves, we're measuring ourselves on activities. We're not actually measuring ourselves on value or usable software often. This is a common scenario I find at companies. What we don't clearly see from the previous slide is that if you were to dive into that value level that I talked about, that epic level, and it took, I think I said 160 days at a lot of these large companies, behind the scenes there's a lot of stuff going on. So when you dive down into it, there's 4 teams involved to deliver this feature in this example. So there's a team called Pluto, and Pluto has 2 stories that it takes to deliver this feature, and they can't do them in parallel because they have dependencies within their own team, so internal dependencies. Maybe they don't have enough capacity to do them both at the same time. Maybe they have a skill set constraint where the, or even a technology constraint where the back end has to be done before the front end, something like that. So there's sequencing happening here. And then beyond that, there's another team called Falcor, which is an adjacent team within the same portfolio that has to do some work. Maybe it's a peer team that they work alongside of. And then there's this concept of away teams. Away teams are teams that aren't in your area. Maybe they work in a totally different area in your company. They need to do work. Sometimes this could be like a security team or a platform team or some kind of shared service team. So really when you put the whole picture together, you have a lot of people doing work, having to communicate with each other. It's all got to come together. And then when it does come together, the customer gets some value. This is not the way everything is, but this is a common scenario I see at large companies. So in the work that I do, a lot of times what we're trying to do is apply lean concepts that came from manufacturing into software. And I'm not going to drain this slide, but the thing I want you to notice is that if you were going to apply lean to software, the first point actually kind of stands out to me. That's like the first thing that you would do. So you would precisely specify value by product. And when I come into companies, what I find is that if I start to ask questions and look around, there's not a real good pulse on value. There's not a real good pulse on what are we delivering for a customer. There's a lot of pulse on what is the story I'm currently working on, or what is this task I'm working on. But putting it all together into a story of value isn't very clear. And why is that? You know, why did that happen? Well, if we take a look across the life cycle of how do we go from an idea to a customer's hands, there's a series of steps that we have to take. And these are pretty standard steps that most companies walk through. Well, in recent years, maybe not so recent, Agile focused kind of on a narrow scope of this life cycle if you really look at it. And then along came DevOps, and DevOps also focused on a narrower scope, but it's still in the same area of the life cycle. The question I have is, what about the rest of the process? There's a lot of other stuff that happens in software development that hasn't really been optimized, that doesn't have a lot of science behind it. And if you're a developer or if you're an engineering team, you probably feel the ramifications of this because you probably get things which seem kind of crazy, like they're not really well ordered, easy to work on. So when you really look at that 160 days and you look at where does the time go, which is kind of what I'm trying to figure out, where does the time go? Very rarely is the problem developers or engineering. Oftentimes the problem is up front. That's where all the time goes from a customer perspective. So that's where we need to start focusing. So maybe AI can help us focus on that. I don't know. Maybe not, but it'd be great if it could. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are trying to focus AI where we've already focused. And I think that area is kind of good enough. Let's focus it on something we've never actually made better. So my last sort of thoughts on why, how do we get here? So let's say you can deliver a story in a few days. A lot of companies can do this. It's easy for them to do. They've been doing this for a long time. And now come the DORA metrics, and you can measure how fast are you completing your stories, I suppose. You might even be elite if you look at what DORA calls elite. And I'm here to say, I hate to break it to you, but you're probably just stuck in storyland. So I work with Domenica de Grandis. She coined this phrase, but the idea is You're a company that looks elite on paper, but the value to customers looks a lot like it did when we were in waterfall. And there's reasons why this is the case. So let's talk about how products go to market. I used to work in an automotive company, Chrysler, and I watched many years how we would actually take products to market, and it always kind of looked the same. So somebody has an idea, in this case an idea for an engine, a new engine that we want to take to a car, and there's this big engineering activity that takes that engine and models it and designs it. And then once we design it, we break it down into parts. We break it down into pieces. Those pieces are then manufactured either at a third-party plant, maybe some other supplier does some of the parts, or internally at our own plants. And then once all the parts are manufactured and built, they get reassembled. And then eventually it goes into a car and a customer could drive that car away. So that's how a product might work. In software, it works pretty much the same way. It's not that much different. So we take demand that we get from a variety of sources. I know this is kind of a hard chart to read. We take that demand, we break it down into things like capabilities or epics, these higher level things. And then we take those eventually and we break them down into stories. Teams go off, they do the stories. And then DevOps comes in and reassembles everything at the end, and it goes out to the customer. The main thing that I want to stress about this is that the reassembly and the DevOps, most of the companies I work at, they don't have a problem over there anymore. They did, maybe 10 years ago. That's not where time goes. Time doesn't get wasted there anymore. Where the time gets lost is on the left-hand side in the disassembly. And if you think about disassembly of an idea into pieces, that's kind of an art today. It's not really a science. Usually you'll have like an SME who does that work, and they've been at the company a long time, and they get all that kind of breakdown, and then people just go off and do the work. Kind of things that you might do on the left-hand side are impact analysis, sequencing. These are things that we need to improve, make better if we're going to really take that customer experience down from 46 weeks to 4 weeks. So all that to just kind of set up this idea of a value stream network. So the value stream network is this idea that in order to deliver value to a customer, you have a social network in your company of people and teams that have to communicate together to get value out the door to a customer. It's kind of like a set of airline hubs. They're all connected together, and the way a customer makes it from Detroit, where I live, to Phoenix is they might hop through a number of hubs to get there. All connected together. The thing about it is that in order for any value to make it to a customer, it has to go through the network. It doesn't have a choice. It has to, and it's very hard to see. So nobody really can see this network today. They see little glimmers of it, but they can't wholly see it, so they don't really know how it works. And it wasn't designed to work the way it is working, I can guarantee you, because nobody could ever really see it. So we've been trying to see this network for a long time. If you think about some of the activities, I'm sure you've done value stream maps at some point in time. That's an attempt to kind of to get a view of this. How does work actually work? How does it make it to customers? The problem with it is it's static. And because your organization isn't static and it's changing every day, the maps get out of date before you even get out of the workshop. There's always things changing. You have dynamic orgs. Dependency tracking is another example. So obviously, if you're talking about flow and trying to get value to a customer, dependencies are a big deal. So dependencies between teams and within teams, these are all things that tend to drag down flow. So for years, we've tried to keep dependency trackers updated. I don't know if you've ever tried that. It's very difficult. Again, it gets out of date. Nobody keeps going with it. They drop it. So entropy complicates flow. This idea of entropy is this idea that everything that comes together falls apart. So while this doesn't look like my house, it feels like my house at times. You know, anyone who's ever owned a house, you just can't believe all the things that go wrong. That's entropy. You're looking at entropy. Or if you're getting older like I am, it gets harder to get out of bed. You know, it gets harder to get out of those tiny chairs in the cyclorama. That's entropy, right? we don't think our org's entropy. For some reason, we think our orgs are just static and they just always stay the way they are. Oh, you know, I've made that improvement, it's just going to stay. Well, guess what? It doesn't stay. It falls apart. You just can't see it falling apart. This is an example of a client of mine who, when I wrote the talk, was on their 7th Agile transformation, and now they're starting their 8th Agile transformation. Why do we think this keeps happening? I think entropy has something to do with it. So, I have a large client, large financial services client, and they look a lot like many other clients that I talk to. On the left-hand side, we have the WIP, or the amount of work they're trying to do, and it's going up. So the demands on them are going up. And the green bar on the bottom of that chart is flat. So when your capability to deliver remains flat and your WIP goes up, the only place for the time to go is up. It's just math. So this is like a lot of companies today where the times keep getting longer and longer and longer from a customer perspective, and the demands keep getting higher. So how would we help this client with their value stream network? If I look at a number of other places where things are hard and things are hard to see, I find this concept of graph theory. I've noticed that a lot of people have recently been using graph theory in different domains. This is an example of using graph theory in an airline network example to try to understand how do we need to change the network to better service customers. Being able to see it helps us see things that we maybe can't see with the naked eye. So I thought, why wouldn't we try to apply this to our organizations? Before I do that, I just want to explain some basics about graph theory. I'm not an expert on graph theory. I'm just a guy. Remember, I just happened to work with some people that wrote some books. There's nodes and edges in a graph in this example. So a node in my example will be a team. That's how I'm gonna draw nodes as teams. And then the edges are dependencies between teams or dependencies within teams. So a team can also not just have a dependency externally, but it can be internally. It could be a skill set, it could be a technology constraint, it could be all kinds of constraints. And I use Gephi, which is an open source tool for graphing. It's really cool to generate a few graphs. So this is what the graph looked like when I threw it up there. One thing I should mention is you can also size the nodes, and you can use various metrics for the node sizes, whatever you choose. So the first thing I did is I thought about what if we made the node size based on the number of dependencies. That would be interesting. Who has the most dependencies in our organization? I saw this graph, but I didn't find it that insightful. Because honestly, if you have a lot of dependencies but you're moving super fast, I don't really care. Right? Maybe you're an SRE team that's got a lot of people depending on you, but you're moving really fast. Like, I don't care about that. So then I thought about, what if I looked at how long these teams take to deliver value? We call that flow time. So I noticed a totally different picture. I started to see this QAS team bubble up in kind of the middle of that graph. But again, if you take a really long time to deliver, I don't care if nobody's actually depending on you. You've got very few dependencies. So that's not sufficient. Then I thought, yeah, the problem with flow time and measuring how long it takes to deliver something is that there's all this stuff that you may not be delivering. The flow time only thinks about things which you have delivered. It doesn't happen to notice the things that you haven't delivered yet, or maybe a aging work that's just sitting around that you're carrying around. So we have a way to measure that. It's called projected flow time. It basically looks at your WIP, and it does an approximation of how long we think it's going to take you to deliver all the work you have, including the work you haven't finished yet. That painted a little bit of a different picture of this org, where almost everyone seems to have a problem with WIP, which doesn't surprise me. And then I kind of settled on a final measure where I took the number of dependencies times the projected flow time. And this was just a simple analysis that I did just to try to understand, if we did have a way to see it, what could we do with it? In this case, the circles that are on Prodigy and Falcor, in this org, that would be where to invest. What I'm trying to show people is not where they're inefficient, which is kind of the way managers tend to think, Where are we bad? Where are we red? Where are we inefficient? This is the way leadership tends to think. I'm trying to focus people on where should you invest. That's a totally different way of thinking about it. If we knew where to invest and we could see it dynamically, I think we'd be much better off. The thing about the previous graph is that it was static. So again, another static view is another static view. The thing about graph theory is that there's this concept of dynamic graphs. So you can actually view it in real time and it changes as you're viewing it. So I thought that might be helpful for the problem that we're facing when I talked about entropy. So in Q2, maybe we invest in Prodigy and Falcor. In Q4, we take a look at it again and we see that Pluto is now the place where we might want to consider investing. This is how it would work. You're always going to have another bottleneck. You're always going to have another place to invest. You're never going to be done. But at least if you can see where the best place to put your money is, you'd be moving in the right direction. And then in Q2 2023, you look at it again and you notice, wait a minute, I think that says the management. The management is now the place to invest. I don't know, maybe that's the place. And you might also notice that some of the previous investments you made are starting to fall apart, kind of like this door. So you might be able to see it. And this is how we used to manage manufacturing. We had real-time views of plant floors. We could see what was changing, when it changed. Software is the new manufacturing. This is the new place where money goes and value comes from. We need to step up the game in the way we see it and the way we monitor it. So I'm going to leave you with some tips. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time. I think I should be okay. Anyone have a time? All right, cool. I'm going to leave you some tips, basic tips, things that you could do to get closer to a value stream network. First tip is measure value from the eyes of your customer. So a long time ago, hopefully, we used to do waterfall. And on the right-hand side of this chart, it says annual budgets and projects. The thing about projects is they were very customer-focused. We were going to deliver something for a customer in a project. Problem with that is it was really big, too big. Then we swung the pendulum way over to the left, and we started measuring things way too small. And I think part of the reason for that is because a lot of the cadences around Scrum and other methods like that tend to force you to cut things up. Manager comes to you and they say, hey, what have you delivered this sprint? I'm not done yet. Cut it up. Cut it up. We started making things smaller and smaller and smaller, and we kind of lost the value in doing that. So I'm suggesting we need to swing it back towards the middle, and we need to keep the feature whole. We need to start measuring just things that customers want, not all the things that it takes to deliver the things that customers want. And I use the Hawthorne effect here. This is the idea that when you start measuring something, people start changing their behaviors. I think when we start measuring all those sprints, people started changing their behaviors and the way they track things. Remember I talked about impact analysis and I talked about sequencing? Well, there's a lot of people that talk a lot about, they do this kind of impact analysis, but they're not really basing it on facts. They're basing it on maybe instincts. So I think we need to start, when we do impact analysis and we break things down, we need to use things like health. What is the health of this product that we're actually going to build this for? Is it healthy? Well, how do we know it's healthy? Well, if you're only doing features and you're only doing defects, you're not healthy. You got to do technical debt. You got to pay down the security risks that you might have. So if you're healthy, you're doing all those things. So let's use health as a measure of impact analysis. Capacity. Let's use capacity as a measure of impact analysis. How many times does something get scheduled that actually looks at the capacity of the team and says, yeah, this team can take up this work? I often find that 35, 40, 50% of orgs don't have any capacity for the next 6 months, yet we still keep piling work on top of them. Track dependencies. I know it's hard, do it anyway. I don't see any way around this. Maybe AI can help us with this, I don't know. But I don't see a way we could ever get away from tracking dependencies. Sequence work considering fastest value first. So a lot of people focus on prioritization. I don't really like that word. The reason I don't like the word is it causes us to chase shiny thing after shiny thing after shiny thing and leave behind stuff that's not finished. I like the word sequencing because I think the problem we're having is a sequencing problem. So what this chart is trying to show you is the bars are epics, and the green in the bars are completed stories within the epic. So the idea is finish the stuff that's almost done first before you start other things. And generally when I do this kind of analysis at a company, the peanut butter, which is kind of spreading the effort across all the things just to make the people happy, tends to be applied to all kinds of things that aren't even started yet. Yet we've got all these things that are almost done that we're just kind of holding around for a long time. Let's finish those things before we start the other things. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen the Webb telescope. When I did this talk, I kind of looked around at it. I really think that if we could ever have some software or a way of viewing our organizations, it'd be like a Webb telescope moment where we start to see things that we don't even realize are happening. So that was kind of the reason why we put this talk together. We're living in a non-static world. The world isn't static, but we keep thinking that it is. We need to adjust our way of thinking and viewing things. So that's it. Are there any questions? This one? Oh.
Can we transition back to the slides? Okay. We'll just do that.
I don't know.
Let me run a mic over to you.
Mm-hmm.
DORA metrics is lead time delivery to production,
Mm-hmm.
which I think would be from that start point all the way to the end.
So
The
so
graph showed it just dev and test.
when you think about it from a story perspective, the theory is that it goes all the way into prod. But when you really start going around and measuring things, you find a lot of things go into prod dark, and the customer still can't use them. And I'm talking about large companies, not small companies. I'm sure there's different practices, but the idea that we're actually measuring feedback from customers, I find is really lagging what I see in most of the DORA practices that I see. I see kind of like what we're measuring is dev done, in prod, dark, and it's not telling a real story in some companies.
Hi there. I got a question about, so that initial lead up to the dev, depending on what size company you have, it could go from, hey, we're a small team, we understand our value, it's really close, all the way to a large company which has executives and product management, project management, all leading up to it. So from a developer, what can we do to help everybody ahead of the dev process to improve? Because I don't know that we're quite empowered to do so.
Yep. So I think as long as we have this concept that one group hands off to another group, that we're always going to have this problem. Some of the companies I work with have started to blur those lines more and bring developers forward more. In my point of view, until we do that, we're always going to be stuck into some of these issues. I think the best thing I would do if I were a developer is at least be aware of what your customer experience is. What does your customer think? If you think it took 5 days and they think it took 46 weeks, then maybe just start to understand why they think it took 46 weeks. Don't allow yourself to become conditioned to think it only took 5 days. That's probably the best thing. Just keep an eye on your customer. All right. Okay. Thank you, guys.